This was one of the most insane weeks to be a uranium investor I've ever seen. Absolutely mind-blowing what happened. Let's get into the price action first, guys. So URNM, North Shore Global Uranium Mining ETF, down 2.88%. S&P 500 flat. So we got some price underperformance here. Obviously, if you look at the 1 month performance of uranium, this ETF was up 9%. The S&P 500 was down 3%. So we got a little bit of a correction happening here. And the reason why last week there was underperformance in uranium is because there was fear, uncertainty, and doubt around the Russians attacking a nuclear power plant. The big Achilles heel to the uranium story is some big nuclear accident. We talked about how low the odds are of that ever happening. Even in war times, the odds are extremely low. And so what happened was Russia took over some nuclear power plants, which, by the way, are extremely upgraded, extremely safe, and meant to even protect against missile attacks. And so let's go through that story, right? Here is a article from CNBC saying, seeing Ukraine's nuclear reactors come under attack is new and especially alarming to much of the population that equates nuclear with weapons and danger. At the same time, nations are coming to realize they can't meet their climate goals with renewables like wind and solar alone. There's a sea change in sentiment about nuclear at the COP26 climate conference last year. So nuclear investors who saw that big global acceptance of nuclear at this global climate summit could foresee how nuclear power is going to be adopted globally, whether or not there are these scares. This is the result of that incursion. Russian forces seize Europe's largest nuclear power station. So now they own the nuclear power station, right? And they don't want to occupy a radioactive, melted down country. So they were careful about it, and now they own it. And so here is the final outcome of that story. The United Nations nuclear watchdog and U.S. Energy Secretary both said the plant was secure. Director General of the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency said at a news conference, there has not been a release of radioactive material. The integrity of the reactors has not been compromised. And so there still is a little fear around this, which explains the dip in the price, which is unfounded because the long-term story for uranium couldn't get any better, and this week literally accelerated that. Look at this map, guys. This shows the share of natural gas imports coming from Russia in 2020. The dark yellow countries are highly reliant on Russia. The light yellow countries are not, and they don't get their natural gas from Russia. We talked about how unbelievably bullish France is and how they're doubling and tripling down on nuclear power production. Same with the UK, right? Rolls-Royce, a pioneer in small modular reactors. UK and France, you see they're light yellow. They're not worried as much, but you can see how the dark yellow country, Germany, which has been trying to move away from nuclear power and more towards renewables, is just getting absolutely squeezed right now. And there's this big problem where they're so dependent on Russia that their fuel prices are climbing. And so Elon Musk, again, one of the most powerful proponents of renewables and what they can actually do, said this: hate to say it, but we need to increase oil and gas output immediately. Extraordinary times demand extraordinary measures. Obviously, this would negatively affect Tesla, but sustainable energy solutions simply cannot react instantaneously to make up for Russian oil and gas exports. What has Germany been relying on this whole time? Their strategy has been, we're going to move towards renewables and sustainable energy. Well, now they can't. Elon Musk is admitting that sustainables won't cut it. They're relying on Russia. They got to move away from Russia. So what is the natural beneficiary of all fossil fuel crises? It's nuclear power. And so that's why I say this week accelerated the move towards nuclear power. Look at this headline. Germany reconsiders nuclear energy in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is the biggest story for uranium. You now have the majority of Europe moving fully towards nuclear power. Germany finally, we've been talking about this, finally reconsiders nuclear power. it seemed pretty obvious given the world events, but this week again accelerated it. Germany reconsiders nuclear power in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So now you have again France, UK, Germany bullish nuclear power. So that's the demand side, right? Let's talk about the supply side. We've talked about how there's a supply demand crunch. We're getting increased demand. We're getting a geopolitical race to shore up energy supplies. Uranium supply is extremely in demand right now, right? So let's talk about the supply side. Well, we get an indication of the supply of uranium from the Nuclear Energy Institute, right? US nuclear industry presses White House on Russian uranium imports. They're begging the White House on this. And here's what they say. While many Western nations, including the US, have imposed sanctions against Russia as a result of the invasion, uranium sales and related financial transactions are exempt from those restrictions. Why? Because, as the Nuclear Energy Institute says, currently conversion and enrichment capabilities in the US do not fully meet the needs of our fleet of reactors and US companies import from many countries. Roughly half of the uranium powering US nuclear power plants comes from Russia. So we're desperate for Russian uranium supply. And those plants produce about 20% of US electricity. So literally, we're desperate for uranium supply from Russia. What does that tell us? That's why the nuclear energy industry in the United States is begging Biden not to sanction Russia over these energy supplies. So what this means, again, is as early stage investors, you have to front run the news. What that means is that the US will incentivize mining. The only way to do that is to raise the spot price to incentivize this production. And that's extremely bullish for US miners and actually any miner globally that actually is in a stable jurisdiction. So here you have the nuclear industry admitting that supply is extremely constrained. Okay, it's so constrained that we're not sanctioning Russia, even though there's kind of like this humanitarian disaster happening. That's how extreme the supply constraint is. And so we have this headline, nuclear fuel market, uranium price jumps on supply scarcity fears, guys, all while the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust continues to bleed the market of supply. We're going to have a melt up in this space, just like everyone's predicting we're going to have a melt up in oil and natural gas, because this war is completely disrupting the supply. And so we talked about demand. Here's the supply piece, extremely constrained. So seeing stocks fall because of mainstream media headlines saying that there's going to be a nuclear meltdown of some sort because Russia took over a nuclear power plant, again, brings me back to Howard Marks' quote, losing sight of those long-term prospects because of the desire to avoid short-term volatility lets you miss out. Because again, the fundamentals could not be more bullish. And this week, again, just gave uranium investors so much to be happy about. And so next week's probably going to be crazy too. And we'll stay on top of it. But again, everything is lining up for the mother of all melt-ups in the uranium spot price and subsequently uranium miners. We shall see how this all plays out, guys. This discussion is for informational purposes only. Please consult a certified financial planner when making any decisions about investing. And do your own research before making any decisions. Investments are risky and you can lose lots of money in them.